But how does that work? Are they given an X amount of dollars to approve per day, and they hit their quota and they can't approve anymore? I mean, it almost seems like that's how it works.
No, there are very clear algorithms that say, for example, if you have low back pain, and your surgeon or your physician says, I think you should have an MRI. I think you have a herniated disc. There's a very clear algorithm that says no MRI until you've had 6 weeks of physical therapy first, until you've tried, X, Y, Z. In which case, if the symptoms are still not better, if you've been compliant with the physical therapy, you've done your exercises, you've taken your anti-inflammatories, and you're still struggling, then yes, we'll approve the MRI. I'm trying to think of,
then they have to approve the coverage of the PT.
Correct.
And how many hours for that physician who was celebrating after 2 months, you said, I wonder how much money he spent in payroll when his staff was on the phone trying to get paid for this. So probably it was a net loss for him financially by the time he finally got paid.
Well, the physician wasn't making any money on that, on the medication. That was just to get the patient what they needed. The physician wasn't going to make any money on the medication.
I see. Yeah. So he really, really paid out of pocket to get that done.
Correct.
Wow.
So that's part of the overhead for his office is keeping people on staff who will go through the wickets of trying to get people the care that they need. Because the alternative to that would be for the patient to pay out of pocket for that medication.
And that's a whole other issue, expensive medication that is so much cheaper in other countries, and it's 10 times more here because it can be. Can you comment on what we can do to make our insulin more affordable when diabetics are dying because they can't afford their insulin?
So I think there are people who have made a career out of looking at those issues. And I would refer you to Marty McCary,
okay,
who has a piece in his book called The Price We Pay. And I believe it was Dr. Marion Mass who has done the background, done a lot of the background investigation into pharmacy benefit managers and group purchasing organizations.
Okay.
But they're much better equipped to talk about that than I am.
Sure, I understand. There's just so many questions. We don't have enough time to cover it all, but in what other areas would you say moral injury is a factor where people have no idea that that's what's going on? I'm thinking one area that I'm thinking of is, for example, restaurant workers who are pushed to work and not take breaks, and they don't have sick time, and so they go to work when they know they probably shouldn't. They may not be washing their hands as often as they should. I mean, I think this moral injury could go everywhere, into every walk of life.
Right. So, I think the difference there is that if a restaurant worker walks off the job, a diner might go hungry, but they may not, a harm isn't necessarily going to accrue.
Right.
If they come into work ill, that's another issue.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a little bit different connotation than moral injury. I do think that there probably should be stronger labor laws, but that's a little bit different than moral injury. The other two places where we've really heard that the term resonates are in public defenders and educators. And so it seems like the service sector, where the mission-driven service sector, and is really where people are struggling with this feeling like they're in double binds, that they went into the profession for one reason, and then their hands are being tied from doing that thing that they vowed they would do.
I see. So we're talking, the threshold of moral injury would be where someone's life is on the line, whether they are incarcerated or not, whether they have adequate legal defense or not, whether they get surgery in a timely manner or not.
So I think this is where it transgresses deeply held moral beliefs.
Yeah. Pretty simple. Pretty
Right.
simple. So what would you say? So I want to kind of shift over to what you say that the solution would be. What can we do if we've got, people in our lives who are suffering moral injury? What can I do for my friends and family members who may not know that this is what they're experiencing? They don't have the language for it. I can share this. I'll be sharing this idea far and wide. And I hope that as I get feedback from my readers, I can maybe forward some follow-up questions to you. But what can I do to help them besides helping them know that, well, this is what it is? Mm-hmm. And what changes would you like to see happen yesterday?
So the first thing is that I think it's hard sometimes, as you said, for people to understand that this is moral injury. So in healthcare, there has been a big focus on burnout, and my thinking on this has evolved a bit since we first wrote the article, because I think the two are actually related. And burnout is a cluster of symptoms where many roads can lead to burnout. There are lots of ways to get there, but it seems from our discussion that moral injury is the biggest, that's kind of the biggest road to get to burnout. And what burnout is, the symptoms are emotional exhaustion, feeling as if you're ineffective, and then depersonalizing. And if you think about moral injury, if it occurs over time, if you are continually unable to get your patients what they need, that is exhausting. If that happens on a regular basis, you begin to feel very ineffective, that you can't get your patients what you need, even though you're fighting your hardest. And then finally, as you watch this happen repeatedly, you start to distance yourself from your patients because it becomes painful to watch what happens to them. And so that's the depersonalization part of it. So I think unattended, unrecognized, unacknowledged moral injury can be the source of burnout. So having said that, helping your friends to understand what the difference is between burnout and moral injury, and helping them understand it's not about them, it's about the broken system, can help to at least make it can help them feel like, okay, at least it's not about me. And if it's not about who I am as a person, then we can start working on making change. And I can stop thinking that if I just do yoga 8 hours a week, I'll be better. So that would be the first thing, is to help people exactly get the language, which is, by the way, one of the most common things that we hear from people is, I finally have the language to explain the experience that I've been having. So that's the first thing. The second is
the words. We need the right words.
Right.
Yeah,
and
so
the language is so important because our language forms our thoughts. Mm-hmm. And it structures our thinking, and that structures our solutions. So when people
build the physical neural network to catch the idea. Yeah.
Right. And so when people talk about, well, it doesn't matter whether it's burnout or moral injury, I think it actually does matter, because it matters whether we're talking about individuals, whether we're talking about systemic issues, and then how we frame the thinking around that phrase. So the other thing that I think we need to do is we need to start recognizing that clinicians are valuable, and that the key to all of healthcare resides in the clinician-patient relationship. And if you don't have a high quality clinician-patient relationship, if you don't value that, you will not, healthcare is lost. And so if we value clinicians, if we value the clinician-patient relationship, and then if we come together as a community to say, here are the patterns that we see, here are the things as patients that we struggle with, here are the things that we as clinicians struggle with, and come to a decision about what are our priorities for fixing them, then I think we can move forward in a healthier way. But it is going to take all of us working together to make this change.
What can I do to encourage people who are patients of a clinician who is going through this moral injury? What can the patient do to make it better for the clinician?
In the moment, there may not be a lot, except saying, I know that this is hard work right now, or you're working in a difficult environment. I get it. The other is, if there have been more and more patients who are writing about their experience with difficulty getting care, I think having empathy for the clinicians who are really fighting a difficult battle right now, and who are on their side. That's the amazing thing, is that I think there's been some, some of the advertising, some of the media has tried to portray clinicians in a more difficult light. But the reality is that physicians and patients, clinicians and patients, all have the same goals. We all are working to the same end. We want people to feel better.
Sure.
That's why we went into this.
Yeah.
And so having empathy and maybe asking your physician, what is the reason why I can't get this? So that you start to understand it's not the physician who says no, it's either the constraints on the system or the constraints in the insurer. They're in their insurance coverage, in which case they can talk to their employer and say, this wasn't covered. I would like next year for you to consider covering it. Or why aren't you covering it?
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we can all be a little bit more curious about what's happening in the healthcare space, and not paint it with a simple brush and say, oh, Medicare for All is going to fix this, single payer will fix this, because I worry that if we don't pay attention to the details and we don't pay attention to the incentives that we're building into single payer or Medicare for All, we're going to end up in the same place.